Happy Easter, and thank you for joining us on this week's episode of the Everyday Leader Podcast. Join Matt, Tate, and myself as we discuss the Easter season and some of the greatest lessons we've learned from Jesus Christ. And we hope that wherever you and your family are this Easter season, that you will be able to celebrate it with peace and happiness.
Welcome to the Everyday Leader Podcast. Leadership is a choice. Join me, Matt, and my co-hosts Drew and Tate each episode as we break down how to lead powerfully in your family, team, and organization. Hey everyone, welcome to the Everyday Leader Podcast. I am with Drew and Tate today, and we're excited to dive into the topic of Easter. Obviously, it's Easter week, and a lot of people around the country and around the world celebrating Easter this week. And we're kind of excited to get into this because you don't always think about Easter and then like, how does that relate to leadership, right? And we're definitely going to do that. I made the comment a little bit earlier that I believe, again, there's room for everyone's beliefs, and my belief is that Jesus is the ultimate example of an authentic and powerful leader. And so there's actually tons of lessons, whether you are actively engaged in a religion or actively have a relationship with him or not, just from a principle standpoint, there are tons of lessons from his life and his teachings about how to show up as a powerful leader. So we're excited to get into that. Want to kick it off today with each of you, Drew and Tate, and just share a little bit. What does Easter mean to you? Like when you reflect on how it's impacted you in the past and maybe now, I know both of you have families. How does it land for you and your families, and what does it mean to you? Drew, let's start with you.
Yeah, I love Easter. I love the season of Easter. And I think along with many others Matt and I belong with the same faith. Many others in our faith have maybe recognized we haven't put maybe a big enough significance or importance on Easter. So our church has pushed and made an initiative this year to almost to like try and treat Easter like Christmas. And it's been really refreshing because I feel like, for me at least in the past, I've always had this, like, Christmas is probably my favorite time of year. And Christmas wouldn't be what it is. It wouldn't have the significance that it does if it wasn't for Easter and Jesus Christ and his life and what happened during the last week of his life. So it's been a really good time to reflect, a really good time to think about, okay, what are the traditions we have, and what are we talking about with our kids? And we've made a greater emphasis in our own family this year to be intentional about Easter. And I feel like that's been a really good thing for our family. And so I'm excited to do better about making an Easter a very significant, important part of my life. Not that it wasn't before, and I don't feel like I put the emphasis like I could have in the past in my life. At least to the extent I have with Christmas.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love that idea of having an Easter season, kind of like a Christmas season, or like almost a whole month of it instead of just the day or the Sunday, right? That's awesome. Tate, what about you?
This is a funny hitting one for me at the moment, just because Easter was always my mom's favorite holiday. Um, and as I've gotten older, I certainly understand why. I'm currently reading the Old Testament, and it's such a stark difference for those of people that haven't read much of the Bible. It's very different than the New Testament, and it's really that point in time, starting more with the beginning of Jesus's life, but really Easter, the crucifixion of Jesus and the promises that were made around that really changed not just Christianity, but like the beliefs and hope of life in a lot of ways. And I guess to kind of summarize it is, the rules in the New Testament are pretty black and white. They're pretty, you know, you live this way or you don't make it kind of approach. And with the life of Jesus and the sacrifice he made, it really changed the outlook for a lot of people. And I think it just, we're a lot of imperfect people, you know, and doing the best we can. And to think that any of us are doing things exactly right, or that there's been anyone outside of Jesus himself that it's lived anything near a perfect life, it's just hard to believe. And so it's literally that moment in time, in my belief, that the world changed, like the direction of it, the hope, everything.
Yeah, 100%. That's so good. And I believe that it's funny, even though it's been 2,000 years since he was here, I feel like, and again, maybe this is just totally my perception, my reality that I've created. I feel like there's a renewed shift right now to even get closer to what he really was trying to share with people when he was here, around exactly what you're talking about, Tate. And I'm here for it. Like, I'm excited for it. I think that the world is ready for it. The younger generations are ready for it. And I don't think that any of the older generations were against it per se. It's just part of like the shift that's going on. And so one of the things, like, as we kind of transition this into like, okay, what are the lessons from, the life of Jesus and from that week of his life in particular that we can learn around leadership? One of the first things that comes to mind, Tate, you mentioned, right? Like, all of us are a lot of imperfect people. And I'm fascinated with Jesus's interaction with imperfect people, with people who were back then pegged as sinners, right? And it's really, really fascinating to look at. Jesus actually didn't really condemn people for making mistakes. He condemned people for inauthenticity, who were judging other people for making mistakes and pretending like they weren't. And that's a wild concept when you look at that. And such a profound lesson for us as leaders. Like, what are we doing?
I kind of want to jump in there for a second, Matt, because along those lines, everybody talks about, Jesus going to the temple during this week, and how,
Right. Cleansing it.
it was such a out of character for him to go and run people off and flip the tables over and throw a fit. And but I think you hit the nail on the head at what was truly going on there. And it wasn't necessarily him going and making a scene. It was basically him removing the barriers that had essentially been there for people to get into the temple and become closer with God. And essentially that's what was there. That's what he was removing and getting out of the way. It's like, look, guys, you're in the way. Get out of the way. Let people get in here. And it's such a different take on it than, him, the idea of him going in and judging what those people were doing, which there may have been some of that.
Well, I think I'm glad you brought up that story. We were just reading about that story this morning. The cleansing of the temple, and I think that part of the principle there that I've picked up on from that story is that leadership and boldness are very closely related, and you can have love right there with both of those. That love doesn't mean an absence of boldness. And so I actually think about, like, in that story, right? And obviously there's a ton of details we don't have about exactly what he did and what he said, right? But just the way it's written and the way we kind of understand it, I think about if he just shows up and is very passive and just kind of allows this stuff to go on, what do other people miss out on because of his unwillingness to be bold? And so I actually think that that's a powerful lesson where it's like, hey, I know who I am. I know what I can do for people. And I'm going to get a little bit bold to, like, wake people up to that, because I know that, like, what's on the other side of it, right? The scriptures that follow right after are like the healing that took place.
Well, I think a key thing to point out in all this is the definition of Gentile in during that time. And basically that meant anyone that wasn't of Jewish faith. And so that's not what Jesus taught. He never once said you had to be Jewish to follow him and God. That was kind of one of those barriers that I think he was breaking down at that time too. It's like, look, you can get into the second and third portions of the temple, whether you're Jewish or not. I don't care. Get out of the way.
Yeah, I think it also is just an example, and I love just the symbolism, and often Christ is referred to as the Lamb, and and sometimes he's a lion. And most of his earthly life, I think it was being the Lamb, and I believe in his second coming we'll see more of that lion, and I think it was a glimpse of that. And yeah, no, I love I love this week. I love the chance to like reflect on that final week of his life and each day of his life. And it's Monday right now that we're recording this episode. And so this will be likely released Thursday this week. And so it's it's I think it's fun to go through and each day of the week review what was going on during Holy Week of the Savior's life.
Yeah. Well, so Drew, you kind of touched on like the whole concept of a lamb and a lion thing. That's another thing that Jesus demonstrated throughout his life, even like before he took on his earthly ministry. And it's the ability to hold two of something that don't seem like they're supposed to be able to go together. And that, for our listener, that for my personal leadership journey has done more for me than maybe any other one principle that I've been able to wrap my mind around. And it's training your mind to look for a way to hold both of something that doesn't seem like they can go together, because it's so expansive and you find yourself asking different questions, having space and grace for people, and still being able to like challenge and hold the standards. Like these things don't seem to go together. And yet obviously Jesus demonstrated that, like in your example, Drew, and eternally, right, with justice and mercy. Like those two things are not supposed to be able to go together, and yet they do because of what he created. And later as we move on through the week, right, I think of when he's in the garden and he's the greatest of all, and in that moment he's basically the least of all, right? He's all alone. He's like under that immense pressure and pain and suffering. And that's another one of those things, like how could the greatest of all also be the weakest, the least of all in that moment? And it's so that all of us could know with surety that he knows exactly how we feel when we're in like our deepest, darkest lows. So I love that principle of being able to hold two of something, two things that don't seem like they're supposed to be able to go together and be held at the same time.
I've got a question for you guys. When you think of Jesus Christ and you think of him through the lens of leadership, what's a story or an example that you feel is like this is how Christ was a leader?
It's not necessarily a story, but just the whole concept of servant leadership. And, here you had the Son of Christ that really didn't need anything from anyone, and he really didn't ask for anything from anyone, and he wasn't boisterous about it and look at me really until the going to the temple that week. And I think there's just so much to be said about just the demeanor he had, the way he approached things with kindness and love. And by no means did that make him soft.
Drew, I feel like the one that's coming to my mind at the moment, I mean, there's so many, right? Like before we started recording, I was saying, how do we even just pick a couple to talk about, right? And one of the ones that does come to my mind is when the woman was like caught in adultery, right? And everyone's trying to condemn her. And I love a few things stand out to me. The fact that he was quiet and like led so powerfully, but without using verbal words was, I think, is an incredible example. And maybe that one resonates with me because saying few words is not natural for me. I talk a lot about leading with questions, not answers. Well, I got a lot of answers and I like them. So I love that example. It's something I'm always working on, to talk less, listen more, and just like let my presence uh, do more of the conveying than my words. So I love that part of it. And then ultimately, like, I love how he kind of brought this up earlier, but viewed that woman with so much compassion and love, and not with condemnation and judgment. And then told her that, like, that, I just think that was, had to have been a really beautiful moment for her, and a really powerful lesson for everyone who was there, to be like, wow, okay. For him to be like, if whoever is without sin, you can throw the first stone. Like, that's a pretty powerful lesson in a very short phrase.
Knowing only one could throw a stone and didn't.
And he chose to say, neither do I condemn thee, go and sin no more. Pretty powerful.
Yeah. But you stole mine, Matt. I know we had a discussion about that same topic last week, and
Sorry.
no, that's great. It's okay. I love that story too, because what prompted this discussion Matt and I had outside of the podcast today was we were just talking about the concept of truth and the importance of telling the truth, and the idea, do you always say what's true even if it hurts or offends? And like, that was kind of the one of the examples we talked about, where it's like, well, he could have said a lot more, and he chose not to, and there wasn't, it likely wasn't useful or helpful to say any more than that. So yeah, I think that's a good lesson in leadership for me. It's like, hey, do I always have to say what I think to my kids about what they're doing, right? Or, is sometimes a lesson just being quiet and not passing judgment, and choosing love. So love that.
Yeah.
My grandma used to always say that you can say no with a smile. And it's a little different spin on kind of the same concept of, especially in a direct question standpoint, that you can say what you feel and you don't have to elaborate and you don't have to be upset, and, just let it be.
Yeah. No, that I believe that the ultimate foundation for the leadership that Jesus displayed was love. And again, we talk about this a lot on our episodes, where like there's these words and terms out there in the world that mean so many different things to so many people, and are kind of diluted or commoditized. And I don't mean that in a negative way. It just is like, to say love almost feels like it cheapens what it actually is. And yet, like, that's the word we have to try to describe it. And so I do feel like that's at the ultimate foundation of all leadership, and specifically, what we're talking about here with his, that like at the end of the day, that's the motivation, right? Everything that Jesus did was for other people. And right, that stems from love. Everything about the way he interacted with people, made people feel, was rooted in love, and people's worth and their identity and their value inherently as children of God. And to your point earlier, Tate, like that wasn't spoken of, or didn't seem to exist as much previously. And that's one of those shifts that came with him. And I feel like that's one of the shifts that we're seeing again right now, is that everything is rooted in love. And that means that sometimes you have tough love, right? Going back to the cleansing of the temple story, right? That maybe could be considered tough love. And other times where Jesus kind of called people out in a very loving way, it's kind of tough love, right? And one other principle, like along with that, right? Like, because, and this has been so helpful to me, and we've probably talked about it on other episodes, and maybe not, and we will if we haven't, is like this idea of choosing things, like because you want them and because you love them or love it. And when I had that realization and kind of like internalized that, it helped shift my relationship with Jesus so much, because I realized, holy smokes, everything he went through, he chose it. And like, how powerful is that? Because he actually didn't have to. I think sometimes we forget that it's like, it was a part of the plan from the beginning, all this stuff. And ultimately though, God's not going to take away anyone's agency, including his own son. And so that just strengthens like the power to me and the personal touch of it when it's like he chose all of that for me. Everything he did, he chose. There was not a hint of like, I have to, I really need to, I should do this. It's like what God expects me to do. He chose it. And the place where he demonstrates that it was his choice to me is when he's in the garden and he says, like, if there's another way, like, I'll take the other way, you know? And ultimately, if there's not another way, like, I'll still choose it. And again, it's just such a powerful demonstration of like choosing what we want and doing things and carrying things out from a place of choice and desire instead of what we think we should or have to do.
Do you guys, I mean, this is kind of maybe an unanswerable question in some ways, but do you guys believe that Jesus knew the outcome at the end of all that prior to?
Yeah.
I mean, not so much the cleansing of the sins, but resurrecting and then, you know, the days after following and ultimately leaving this world what he did.
I believe so. Drew, you got any thoughts
Yeah,
on that?
I believe so as the Son of God, and I believe also maybe being on earth that maybe there were, I don't know if I want to say that I believe he was surprised at all, but maybe there were things that he didn't anticipate or recognize. I don't know. It's been interesting. I've been watching The Chosen, and they just released a new season of it this last week in theaters. And so I feel like they've done a really good job. I don't care what Christian denomination you belong to. I think there's a lot of great stuff in it. And it's kind of been interesting to see maybe the human side of Christ a little bit and the way they portray him through that. And that we watched the second part last night, and I believe it's David he sees, like almost, I don't know if it's as an angel or a vision or you know, I'm not quite sure what they meant to interpret, but he looks away from him for a second, looks back, and it almost seems like he was shocked that he was gone. So kind of an interesting portrayal. And I think, you know, I think how could he not have known with the way he spoke to his apostles about, you know, in 3 days, the temple being destroyed and being built back up and being symbolic of himself and his body. And so, yeah, I guess the long answer, I guess the short, I'm maybe rambling at this point, but short answer, yes.
Yeah, I really believe that Jesus knew who he was. It's actually another principle that's to me is so powerfully demonstrated and was an anchor for him as he knew who he was. And I think also we forget sometimes the insane shock to the system that he was in that community, in that like society at the time. That like here's a group of people who more or less are looking for someone else to come, and he's there saying who he is, and they're like, and it goes against everything that they were expecting and in a total way that they, you know, don't believe in, and just really shocked the system. And so again, like that's powerful. Like when you know who you are, you're willing to be bold and take a stand for who you are because like you know what you can bring about and the impact you can have. And I really believe that was an anchor for him. And he unequivocally declared who he was many times during his earthly ministry, and it was a really great anchor, um, you know, for him and for his small band of followers too. I think that was an anchor for them as well.
You Tate, since you ask.
No, I mean, my initial is, yeah, he had to have had an idea. And I guess, like Matt mentioned, the moment in the garden prior to, and it's moments like that that make me go, man, I don't know if he did completely. Because if, I guess it's hard for me to wrap my mind around the idea of mourning and the loss and dealing with that. If you already know, like, hey, I got to make it through the next few days and everything's good, you know? And I don't know.
I mean, that point's interesting too, because I think, uh, you know, the shortest verse in scripture is Jesus wept. And wasn't that right before he raised Lazarus? from the dead. Like, so yeah,
It's
just
right.
interesting to kind of back to your point, like about mourning and loss, like maybe that's just part of the earthly experience. And yeah, anyways, interesting.
Yeah, no, and I guess it's statements like that within it that make me go, man, did, he knows who he is, he knows the power that he has, but I don't know. I feel like there's more there.
Yeah. Well, honestly, Tate, like, I mean, who knows, right? At this point, it's like all speculation. That's okay. I do think
Well,
there's
but that's
another,
part of the fun of the question,
yeah,
you know.
I do think that there's another principle there, though, right? That he demonstrated, which is like he knew the plan. I think he understood like his mission. I think he understood his identity, and I think there's a good chance he also didn't know all of the details of what he was going to go through. And that's like, I mean, that's
Experienced
life,
it.
right? Yeah, he hadn't
It's
experienced it
one
yet, right?
thing to know something or know the outcome of how something will be, and it's another to actually go through it and experience it.
Yeah. I mean, you think about your business or your family, you can guarantee, right? You might have a really great plan, like you know who you are, you have a clear mission of like what you're trying to accomplish, and you're going to go through all kinds of things that you can never anticipate. And so again, I, it's having the anchor around who you are and your mission that actually carries you through those times. Because I think that in those moments where we get a little glimpse of like, oh wow, I don't think he maybe knew exactly what he was getting into, and he's bringing it up a little bit of a question, which is also a beautiful thing to see, like the human side of him. It's in that moment he thought about you and he thought about me and he remembered like the whole picture, and he's like, I know who I am, I know why I'm here, so like I'm willing to go through with it because I can see all of that and it's worth it. And I think that
Oh, go
a
ahead.
lot of times we forget, like it gets hard and we want to just like abandon ship, right? And we forget who we are, we forget why we're doing and what we're doing, we forget our mission. So I think it's a beautiful principle that he demonstrates as well, like to remember who you are, remember why you're doing what you're doing, and keep going.
Yeah, I think a good lesson there too. It's like just to apply this back to everyday life or being a leader. You know, someone can tell you, hey, this is what it's going to be like to run your business and go through hardships, and you can
It's
hear
true.
that and know that and expect that. And then when you're
And
in
it's
it, it's
still
like,
hard.
holy cow. People told me what this was going to be like, and I had no idea. So maybe there's an element of that to it all. And to Matt's point, I think maybe that's, one of the other great lessons of leadership is just knowing who you are as a leader. And I think he knew that perfectly. He knew his role. He knew his mission. He knew his purpose. He knew who he was here to help. And he had a perfect love, and that made everything possible.
Yeah. Well, so as we kind of start to wrap up here, one other thought I'd love to get your guys' thoughts on. I'll kind of share a little bit about this. I believe that at the foundation of like what Jesus was really fighting for and his role in the whole plan and what it created was it created freedom. It created the opportunity for us to maintain our ability to choose, which also then created the opportunity for us to choose things that don't align with God. And so then without him, like we can't get back to God, right? Like again, there's a lot of eternal laws and things that we don't understand, and that's what he created. So he created the opportunity for us to maintain our freedom and to be able to overcome the times when we use our freedom of choice in a way that's out of alignment with the laws of God. And that's a beautiful thing. Like to me, that's that's like the ultimate leadership, right? Like leading the way, like creating a path forward that otherwise didn't exist because of who you are and your mission and what you execute and what you follow through with. And that's yeah, that's a beautiful thing. So I'm curious your guys' thoughts on that concept. I can also keep jamming on one
Well,
other thought
I'm
if you
just trying to
Yeah.
understand specifically what the question, like, I don't know.
I didn't ask
Nah,
I didn't really ask a question.
Um, I don't even know if this is even related, but what just keeps coming to mind as I've been sitting here thinking, uh, just as you were talking, and this maybe not that even that closely related, but just I've made a big focus, and if anyone follows me, they've probably seen me post and share stuff like this in my own life, but I've just made a big focus on being present and being focused in my life. And I feel like the ultimate way to do that is to focus on Jesus Christ. And I believe that when you do that, when Christ is the center of your life, like that's where joy and happiness can come from, despite your circumstances. And that when hard times come, like being anchored to him, it doesn't matter what's going on in your life when you're focused on the right things. And it's easier said than done. It's easy to say that. It's another thing to live that and to live with an intention in the way where you can experience that in your life. And it's not easy, and it's something I'm still working on every day. And I've just found personally, as I focus on him and his life and his teachings and living the way he wanted, like it seems like everything else doesn't matter in my life. Doesn't mean I don't have things I'm still concerned about or things that are important to me. And the worry and the anxiety and the anxiousness seem to go away, and fear is replaced with hope and with faith and with love.
Yeah, for me, he's kind of that grounding backboard of, the silly, what would Jesus do? I mean, as cliche and as that can be, it's such a good question to ask yourself, especially in those trying times where you're, not sure what the right answer is, or, and beyond that for me, just the idea of hope, because prior to him and his life and his sacrifice, like, I can't imagine living in those times and maybe with the teachings and expectations that were placed upon you if you didn't have that glimmer of hope.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as we wrap up, I'll share one more thought that's been really meaningful to me over the last year and a half or so. And it really is like a huge source of this hope, like you're talking about, Tate and Drew. You mentioned it too. And there's a scripture in the New Testament that talks about when Jesus invites everyone to take his yoke upon them, to basically like yoke ourselves with him. And the promise is like that you'll find rest, or that he will give you rest. I had this realization, partially, I think it hit me this way because I learned the Italian language when I was younger, and the verb to rest can be broken down like with Latin roots that help me think of that word totally differently than I ever had before. Because I think we typically think of rest as like you'll get to chill out, relief. And I think we find all those things when we yoke ourselves with Jesus, for sure. And what I realize is that if you look at the Latin root of that word, and again, I'm not saying that this is what it means, it's just helped me think of it differently. And it's a beautiful way to think about it. That it breaks down to like, RE, which means to return to, and STARE, which means to be. And I believe that what Jesus is saying when he invites us to come and yoke ourselves with him, and what we'll find is we'll actually find who we've always been. He's literally saying, I'll give you a way to return to your being, like who you really are. And that is so freeing, because a lot of times it feels like there's these expectations, or like a perform to play type of system and all that stuff. And I want to share my belief that none of that exists with him. That what he's ultimately offering is like real healing and peace that comes only from getting closer to him, and by so doing finding out who you've always been, and being more confident and more sure and more at peace with you and with yourself. And like what a beautiful thing. Like I think leadership, the most powerful leaders I've ever been around or learned about, are ones who know who they are and are very at peace with themselves. And so I want to share that with each listener, that Jesus doesn't operate in terms of like transactions and dangled carrots and threats and all that kind of stuff that we still see in our world a lot. It's part of the shift that I'm very passionate about moving forward in our world, especially in the workplace and in families, is that everything Jesus has to offer is available to anyone and everyone at any moment. And the only thing that is required to tap into it is your will and to choose it. And that's
I'm so glad
beautiful.
I'm
Amen.
glad you ended up there. And those were the exact thoughts I was having in that moment. And just to reiterate that is, he doesn't say this is for a select few or that you had to be a certain person for this to apply. I mean, this is everyone from, the adulteress to the beggars, to the thieves, to the murderers. I mean, these are promises that he made to everyone. And to your point, with the simple request of believing in him and following.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, and that's not to say that when someone doesn't choose him, there are natural consequences to that, not punishments, natural consequences. Like if you are outside in the sun, enjoying the light and heat of the sun, and you walk underneath something, the sun is not touching you anymore. But it's not because the sun hates you or is trying to punish you. It's because you walked away from the sun, or you turned away, or you blocked it. And so, like, that's still very real. And the beautiful thing is, like, to get it back, you just turn yourself around and walk back towards the sun, and there it is again. And so, because he was willing to choose us, right? I talked about that earlier. Now we all have the opportunity today, tomorrow, and forever to choose him. And it doesn't matter what day that is or what moment that is, because there will be plenty of moments when we don't. And that's the beautiful thing. That's the holding both that didn't seem possible, is that because of him, we can choose him again and again and again.
And my last thought I'll share is my wife and I, we were actually having a discussion last night just about the concepts of hell or people being kept out of heaven. And our belief for both of us as we had that conversation was that we don't believe God's keeping anyone out. Like it's our choice at the end of the day, whether or not we want to be with him. And if we don't choose him, we wouldn't be comfortable being with him anyways. And so, yeah, I think it's beautiful that everything he's doing is in an effort to give us all that he has and to bring us back into his presence. And yeah, I think just having that shift of like, it's about me choosing him has made the world of difference to me. So
You guys have any closing thoughts on, like, maybe the one takeaway that you hope people heard today in this conversation?
yeah, I think I would say, Tate, if we're going to take this back to leadership, I think it would be the lesson I feel like that kept coming up as we talked is that he knew who he was, he knew his mission, and he wasn't afraid to live that and be that. And I think that's if I want to be a better leader, I don't think there's anyone I could try to emulate more than him. Look, if you're a listener and you don't believe in Jesus Christ, that's okay. And it's hard to argue that anyone's had a greater impact on the earth than him. I mean, our our calendar is based off of his life. So yeah, I think that's what I'm hearing, and what comes up for me is that if you want to be a leader, it's know who you are and know your purpose and your plan, and don't be afraid to live that.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say you can have anything you want, you can create anything you want. It's available to you. And like we've talked about, the way to tap into that, it's not outside you. There's a verse where Jesus talks about, like, the kingdom of God is within you. It's not outside you. And so doing the work to get closer to him is the work of getting closer to who you've always been and finding out more of who you really are. And when you stay true to that, you can create anything you want. You can build anything. You can have everything that he has to offer, which is, we can't even really understand what that is. I know it's pretty amazing though, pretty expansive, something that I want.
Any last thoughts from you, Tate?
The one that keeps coming back for some reason is just the idea, we're talking about, in a sense, comparing ourselves to a perfect person, or is as perfect as you could have been. And I don't want that to be the point, other than, striving to be better every day is obviously a good thing. But he never told us we had to be perfect. And I think that applies in the workplace too. And that it's the effort that matters, the owning, whether that be mistakes or, just genuinely showing people love. I think that, like Jesus, those are the things that can stand out, and it doesn't require perfection. It just requires effort.
Yep. 100%. All right, guys. Well, thank you. This was awesome. To our listener, happy Easter. Enjoy the week in whatever way you choose to celebrate. And please know that wherever you are in your journey and your leadership journey, create some space for yourself, give yourself grace, and recognize that there's so much good out there for you if you decide to claim it and choose it. So whatever that looks like for you, whatever action comes to your mind, today's the day to move towards it.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Happy Easter.
Thanks for joining us on the Everyday Leader podcast. If you're ready to take your leadership journey even further, subscribe to our weekly newsletter for more insights and practical tips. And don't forget to connect with us on Instagram to stay a part of our growing community. Just follow the links in the show notes. If this episode impacted you, please help us spread the word and share the link with a friend from wherever you're listening.